Hello and welcome to the show, The First Steps of God. We're going to be looking at an absolutely fascinating topic today called The Church Fathers Are the Greatest Thinkers of All Time. Woo! That's going to get some people thinking. Well, before we do that, let me introduce my guests. So I have PJ Blackham. Thank you for coming on the show, PJ. And Paul Blackham, you are father and son. Yeah. I love that you're both here. You both have an amazing wealth of knowledge. And PJ, you especially have a wealth of knowledge about the early church fathers. And I was saying to someone the other day, even though you're still at university, you're probably one of the few people who I know who really understands the church fathers. Some people might think, why is that even an interesting topic? Haven't we got all sorts of other things in society we're dealing with? But actually, I think it is important. I hope that you will also see how important it is to understand this topic of the early church fathers and really to reclaim Christian history and see it in a positive light rather than all the negative press that it has been given, especially, say, for the last 100 or so years. So, PJ, you've just come back from university. Can you tell me one important or fascinating fact that you have learnt in this last few months at university?
Well, I was learning about the Cistercian monks. They were a reform group of the Benedictines, if you know them. They were like the biggest order of monks in the West. And they tried to reform it, getting back to the really rigorous, doing that sort of thing. And one very good thing they were good at was being in tune with nature in a way that produce loads of stuff. So they were great at using water. They made like mechanics with running water with like hammers so they could get the water to basically do the smithing for them and things like that. They were very...
Machinery.
Yeah, loads of that sort of thing.
So what time period of history is this?
Well, I think they started in the 12th century and they're still going now. So they, but they, right from the start, they were very employing the newer stuff and they innovated a lot as well.
So they, they just saw creation. They saw nature and creation as something to bless, be able to use and to be able to utilize and make things out of. So they weren't just either abusing nature, as so many today do, and they weren't pillaging nature, unfortunately, as so many today do, but they were using it in the way it's supposed to be.
And
was
not
Bernard
just
one of these.
He was, he was their most famous saint. They produced. They produced a lot of saints, but he's the most
Bernard of Clairvaux.
He's amazing. We'll talk more about him. Bernard of Clairvaux. He is really the preacher during the Second Crusade, and we're going to talk about the Crusades. They're not quite what you have been led to believe. That again, what many people say about the Crusades. But Bernard of Clairvaux, some of his writings and some of his hymns. In fact, we still sing in church today, which is amazing. We'll talk about that later. Paul, you've just written 5 books, isn't that right?
Yes, over the past few months I've written 5 of these. It's really the whole of Christian theology, starting at how do you do theology, the doctrine of God, Jesus, creation, salvation, and then the church one, the 6th one, I haven't quite finished yet.
I've got actually a copy of one of them here.
Oh, that's it.
Frameworks, it is called. It's called Frameworks, and volume Roots.
Yeah,
so basically
the first
foundations.
one. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and 30 Days of Theology and Bible Study. I have read about 3 of these. They are superb. My husband and I are reading through them again, and we're just going through each day. We just sort of look at one, and they are phenomenal. They will really challenge you. That's one of the reasons why I love having Paul with us here. Well, what we're going to look at today is the Church Fathers, and this is a claim you said to me, PJ, when I asked you what topic do you want to look at, and you said, I want to look at how the Church Fathers are the greatest thinkers of all time. That is a big claim. You explain that. Why do you think that?
Well, they basically establish Christendom. They get people thinking in a way, so they read the Bible incredibly because they listen really closely to their teachers, and for the first generation of them, their teachers are the apostles. So they pass down this body of knowledge and this way of reading the Bible, of understanding the world around them and dealing with people that leads to just a better way of dealing with things. So I was talking with you about this before, a lot of other philosophers, particularly the pagan Hellenistic philosophers, think about ideas and they work from there. They have their ideal. They think the perfect thing is like a circle you have in your head. Even if you draw it, it's not perfect, so it's like everything's just got to be in your head.
Imaginary.
Yeah, and that's how that's their starting point. Whereas for the Church Father, it's not that at all. Their starting point is Jesus, and they get to him reading the Bible, they see him in nature and other people in the church, and they're always just trying to get to Jesus, they understand him, and from Jesus they work at everything else, and because they start in the right place, they end up thinking the best things and writing the best books, and they
So in
change
some
history.
sense, you're saying they start with the author of life. So you start with the author of life, then you understand what life is all about.
Yeah.
But if you start with an abstract idea that's separated from really your whole being, your emotions, your spirituality, and you start with this abstract idea, then it really leads you to nothing. But if you start with the author of life, then that makes everything else make sense.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's that contrast between just having clever ideas versus the real universe. So they're always engaging with the real universe. And there's a famous example that people, even nowadays, are like, because it's a guy, I think it's Basil of Caesarea, who said, Jesus made everything in the universe all at the same time. That's how the Bible begins. Jesus, sent from the Father, full of the Spirit, creates the universe, but he does it all at the same time, even the heavens and the earth. So Basil is like thinking, okay, so that means those stars and planets and all those things out there are not like gods or ethereal. They're made of the same stuff as is on earth. Physical things, atoms and things like that.
People like to think anything beyond our little realm is sort of this weird, sort of something is not really tangible. Either it's abstract, or go the other way where nothing's spiritual.
Nothing spiritual. And that's why Basil was good to just say, no, the whole universe is made of the same basic stuff. Well, of course, modern people go, that was brilliant. What an incredible... He knew that the whole... And then it's like, yeah, he did know that and taught it, but it was because he began with Jesus. And therefore people go, he's a brilliant... But at the time, people thought he was mad. They're like, of course the stars cannot be made of the same stuff as Earth. And then he's like, no, I think so, because Jesus made everything at the same time. So it's that way of having the courage to go, if we take Jesus seriously, the whole universe makes sense. They did that and came up with the greatest thoughts ever.
And many people think that Jesus isn't really real. There's that sort of, even in modern day Christian communities, sometimes you wonder if people really believe he's real, he's really alive. Other religions try to say, no, he's just a man and nothing more than that, because God is not really real. If you really look at other ideologies out there, they sort of see as God as this abstract being. But that's not the case with the early church fathers.
No, and they definitely start with him like as a man. So they think about Jesus as Moses met him and as the apostles met him, then think about him as an actual person. Whereas there are some people, as you say, even in the church, there are some people who start with this idea of like Christ being this like idea and this ideology sort of thing that you got to buy into, whereas really you meet him as a person, and they do. And so they do that. And that's why the church fathers do often disagree on things. Like I remember we were reading once about the witch of Endor, and the church fathers don't agree about she performs necromancy. How's that possible? Does she actually do it?
You have to explain what that is.
There's a story in the Bible where there's this witch of Endor, and she claims to be a necromancer, which is to say she can control the dead. And so Saul, he's banned all necromancy, but then he's fallen from grace. He used to be a great king, but he's fallen, and now he's seeking out a necromancer instead of suppressing them. And then she apparently seems to bring back Samuel from the dead, the prophet Samuel, and but she's freaked out by it. So that starts this whole discussion. So they don't agree. But the main thing is that's a really complicated thing in the Bible, and the church fathers don't agree.
Theologians today would discuss all that. But what's interesting, they all agree on Jesus. And that's what's important. And they all see him not just as a good man. Again, that's another modern myth out there. He's just a good man, because of course God can't be real. So Jesus is just a man. He's a good man. Follow him, but nothing more. But actually, the church fathers said no. He is the God of heaven. He is the man of heaven that was born and grew in knowledge and understanding, and then died on a cross, took our sin, and ascended into the heavens. They understand that.
And he had these 12 friends and everything, and they were real 12, and then these 72 as well. So he had loads of these friends, and he taught them, and they went on to teach people. And so one of the cool things the Church Fathers do, they link themselves back to Jesus through his friends and his friends' friends and all that. And you can say, because he's so real, he could just meet someone that met him. That's what, you know what I mean? Like, if you didn't do in the first place, you could do that. And you could, because you get people who are like, oh, I met someone who, like, there are people alive today who could have met, like, Roosevelt and things like that. And then
Winston
it's like
Churchill
that. Yeah, that sort of thing. It's like, with that real, Jesus is that real, and they knew that, and they start from that, and they think Jesus, he's fully God, and he fully came down, and you could have met him, and he had friends, and he grew up.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thanks, PJ. That was fascinating. We're going to chat more about this in the next episode. See you soon.